All right, well, thank you very much for being here today, everyone. We really appreciate it. We've got some really important subject matter here. It's never the most fun subject matter, but if you're in a marketing role or part of an organization that has significant investment in marketing, this is a big deal for all of us. And the landscape is changing pretty fast. So my name is Dave Cacioppo. I'm President and CEO of emfluence. This is Neil Watkins. Just a quick couple of notes about who Neil is and who we are. Yeah.
Hi, I'm Neil, one of the co-founders of Asureti, not Asureti. We test marketed that, I've heard it before. But it is Asureti. We are data protection experts. We take privacy risk, compliance, security, governance, and all that stuff into a nice cohesive strategy of how to help companies survive this ever-changing landscape. That's it in a nutshell.
All right. And a little bit about emfluence. So a lot of you know us, some of you don't. We're a digital marketing agency and a marketing automation platform provider. So our technology would be compared to a HubSpot, Pardot, Salesforce Marketing Cloud. We create, deploy, track multi-channel campaigns, Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn, email, workflows, landing pages, surveys, all that built into one tool. So all these issues surrounding privacy and legislation are extremely important to us because we are a provider of technology to lots and lots and lots of marketers. So we have to be up to speed on what's going on. And Neil and his team are our partners when things get really complex. So that's why Neil is here with us today. So this is more than just about CCPA. So CCPA is on everybody's mind because it's the next thing that's hitting us hard. But there's a whole bunch of other stuff happening. So you've got GDPR. If you're in healthcare, you have HIPAA. There's COPA, which is the children's privacy policy stuff. There's CAN-SPAM. There's Canadian legislation. There's all kinds of stuff that we have to be aware of, and none of it is stuff that should be taken lightly. So,
I was going to say, does anybody know why all those came into effect? Because without those kind of regulations and oversight for privacy protection of consumers, I have an ability to collect, aggregate, trend, and analyze data about you that you're not aware of. And that was great when you were just getting free ads once upon a time, but the populace started to kind of understand that there's more than this and that, thanks to Cambridge Analytica. That finally got it to where my even family members understood it. Like, well, wait a minute, my data's going in places I don't understand. So that's how some of this is starting to evolve.
So it was all really, really early on. It was all really, really cool stuff for marketers. We had this fantastic advantage, could do all these really, really cool things. But as you put yourself in the consumer seat, it's not that awesome. And so this is sort of truing things up and making it a little bit more fair. Makes our jobs harder as marketers, but it's probably the right direction to go. And maybe some of these laws or regulations go too far, but I think that's not too likely. I think we're all going to end up in a good spot. It's just going to make our jobs a little bit harder. But as marketers, we need to be thinking about these kinds of considerations all the way across the customer journey. So we're capturing data, we're doing things with data and personal information in lots of places. So as you think about awareness and consideration, purchase, retention, advocacy, there's touch points with individuals, humans, that we need to be thinking about. What are we collecting? So we have subscriber information, we have website tracking data that we use, email tracking, cross-device tracking, firmographic, demographic, psychographic information. All this stuff really, really matters. And when you think about it as yourself, as the person, wow, there's a trainload of information about you out there that can be used in different ways, and it can be monetized with you getting no value out of the monetization of it. Sell a little piece of my data, I get not much back on that, but somebody's getting something when you do it in aggregate. So also kind of need to think about this around the information lifecycle. And so if you're not familiar with this kind of concept, it's you need to be thinking about the point of collection. So what are the rules that you need to follow when you're capturing data? What are the rules you need to follow when you use data? What do you need to do about disclosing data? What do you need to do, the rules and regulations around retention of data? And what about destruction of data? So a lot of people don't really think of destruction of data as much of a thing, but as these rules and regulations come out, destruction of data and proper destruction of data is a big deal and something that we need to pay attention to.
The overwhelming majority of corporations across the globe in the digital age do not do retention and destruction correctly or effectively. They hold on to it forever and ever, amen, right? I started to invest in storage stock years ago. I heard this thing called cloud. It's going to hold a lot of data. Put all my money into that, good return on investment. Because simply people hold it forever because they know, hey, someday this may have value. But to Dave's point, that's becoming a different mentality as we move forward because it can also be a liability.
And so as a technology provider, what we used to tell our clients was put as much information in our system as you want. Put any field you might ever query on to create a list and produce information and deploy a campaign. Now we're saying, no, only put in there what you really need. It's called data minimization. And so you only put into any system what you're going to need or actually use, what's going to provide value, because you're at risk with every piece of data that goes into a different system. If there's some sort of breach, the more data that's there, the more severe the breach is. So it's something you kind of have to be aware of. So it's a big shift in the last probably 5-8 years in the way that we talk to clients about what data you should put into our marketing stack. So there is this, it's a global shift. Really the biggest piece of awareness is, years ago, CAN-SPAM came out and that was a big thing, and we all kind of learned how to deal with that. And then sort of this next really big wave was stirred up by GDPR. And so we'll talk more about that. And then of course, now it's really hitting close to home with CCPA, but there are at least 15, but there's probably more since we last gave this presentation. States that are have legislation that's in the works, they're all going to be similar. And they're probably all going to be just a little bit different, making it even more complex for all of us to play by the rules.
As a practitioner, I'm rooting for the states to create their own, because the complexity it will create will make my retirement. But as a consumer, I want all of you to try to advocate for that larger federal stuff, because again, companies surviving that in a uniform way is much more economically meaningful for companies. But something to think about as you look to that landscape, it's getting worse and worse and worse, because people are trying to figure out how to establish that right to privacy.
So once again, GDPR sort of set the stage for us in this latest round of panic for marketers, I guess we could say. And so that went into effect in May of 2018. And for lots of people, it didn't matter. Everybody kind of wanted to be aware of it, but for lots of people, it does. So if you do any international business with any EU citizen, you have to play by the rules. And so there's a little bit of leniency in what I didn't know this person was in the EU. What can I do? That the laws and the penalties aren't going to be quite as strict as they might be in the United States for that kind of stuff. But you should be aware of who your consumers are, who the people on your email list, all those things, who they are and where they are. And if they're in the EU, you got to play by these rules. But these rules translate over fairly evenly into CCPA and to a lot of the other rules that are coming along. So it's designed to put control in the hands of us, the consumers, not the marketers in this room, but the consumers in this room. It's fair for us to understand what information someone has about us and how it's being used. And it's also fair for us to say, I don't want to play. I refuse to play in this, and to be honored for that.
When Dave was talking about GDPR, it is the kind of founding document that all the other ones are following, because it was the most thoughtful one to date. It doesn't mean it's the most perfect, but it has a lot of rigor, has a lot of design, has a lot of good intent. I don't know how many people in here have to comply with GDPR. The rest of you just don't know it yet. That's great. Good for business. No. The reason I say this is because when you go into the EU, when you go to nation states that are living over there, they have a fundamental sense of right to privacy that's far different than that in America. You know, we have our constitutional things, we have our discussions, we have our hot button political topics over here in the United States. They feel as strongly about that in the EU as we do about those topics. They're very polarizing, very effective, but very passionate. So that's why they were kind of thought leaders to establish that. But to the other point, the Indian subcontinent is coming out with a privacy law. Singapore has its own privacy law. Hong Kong is developing one. Japan has one. And oh, by the way, China, which seems odd to all of us, have one. And the Russians have the weirdest one. And by that I mean it says something simply of any data you can have as long as it remains on a server inside of Russia. In other words, make a copy here so we can watch it. I don't care what happens next. Right?
All right, so what's the value to us as consumers? Well, it means there's increased security, there's a requirement for increased security around our data. So if someone is if we are housing data on consumers, we have to make sure that that data is as secure as we can make it. There's a required consent to process and share the information. So now we have to get permission. There's the right to correct information about you that might be incorrect. So if some data is out there that's causing you to be targeted incorrectly, or if possibly not qualifying for credit or something like that, you have the right to get information about you out there corrected. You have the right to be forgotten. So I could be on your list and you could have been marketing to me for years, and I have the right to at any point in time say stop it, and you have to stop it, and you have to forget me. You have to delete the information you have about me. And so That creates kind of a complex question for all of us, which is, all right, well, I can delete you from my marketing database, okay, but what about all your purchase history? What do I do there? And so stuff gets really pretty complicated when you try and think about what does that really mean for me as a marketer. And you also have a right to obtain any information that's out there about you. So you can make a request and say, hey, Barnes & Noble or whoever, Amazon, tell me what you know about me. And they should be able to reply back to you, here's what we know. And you should be able to have access to that information.
And it's fundamentally terrifying when you get that. If you actually read it.
There's a lot of stuff. There's a lot of stuff out there about all of us. So what does consent mean? So we said you have to get consent. So it needs to be put in the hands of individuals, put them in control. And as marketers, hopefully by putting people in control, we're building a lot of trust and hopefully engagement, and it's enhancing the experience. So why am I going to allow you to have information about me? Because you're going to do a better job of marketing to me and giving me information that's valuable, products and services that are valuable. So it requires a positive opt-in. It's got to be clear, explicit, and concise. It's got to be easy to withdraw consent. So I opted in. I need to be able to opt out just as easily. You need to keep evidence of that consent. And we need to avoid making it a precondition of service. So we can't require you to give me consent in order to do business with me. So obviously now that creates a ton of challenges for us, the marketers in the room. So how do we obtain adequate consent and how do we provide adequate security? Two major considerations.
I wanted to pause right there because I had Dave change that word to adequate security. How many people in here know what adequate security is? The reason I point that out is that's about as specific as the regulation states. You must protect the data within the consent, but it's value, right? So you have to go to your risk framework. It's a really broad subject, but it talks about adequate. It doesn't say specific. It doesn't say do these 9 things. That's for everybody to figure out. And to his point, that's where the complexity starts to crop in.
So then we've got to figure out how to manage the right to be forgotten. So think about where you have data in your organization. And so, the quick ones are you might have a CRM. You might have a marketing automation platform. You might have random Excel files all over your organization. Probably do. So how would you manage someone's request to be forgotten? It's a big deal. And you have to have, and this is again for the EU, you have to adopt a DPO. So this is a person with expert knowledge of data protection law and practices, and they act as a liaison between the company and the GDPR supervising authority. So that's the requirement of the law there. I don't know whether something like that will pop up here. Doesn't seem like it. I haven't seen anything about a requirement around that for anything that's out there.
We'll talk about here.
So what are the considerations for a privacy notice? Because we now have to have a privacy notice as well. So what information is being collected, who's collecting it, how it's being collected, why it's being collected, how it's going to get used, who it's going to be shared with is a big deal, and what will the effect be on the individuals concerned, and is the intended use likely to cause the individuals to object or complain. So all these things you have to think about when you're developing privacy policy.
How many people in here know their privacy policy? And we're winning today, come on. How many people have read their own company's privacy notice, which can be different, by the way. So that's what he was talking about. It is, and he's going to show some really good examples of how that looks. The one thing I want to point out is the variation between yesterday and tomorrow is it has to be in plain language my family can understand. I'm not saying my family's illiterate or anything. I'm just saying they don't care. They want to make it quick and simple like most people do. Tell me what it is in language I can understand.
So this is P&G's policy, and so they just clearly outlined it about as clearly as they can, right? So I can understand that. Most people, I think, can understand that, and those are just little links within the document to tell you what the actual policy is. Somebody's going to read it. Not many people are going to read it, but more and more will. Neil's going to read it for sure.
Real quick sidebar. There was a travel company that put a policy out there that had terms and conditions out there that said on the very bottom of it, if you call this number, you have an opportunity to win $10,000. A teacher actually read that, called and was awarded $10,000, made the news last week because they're trying to incent people to actually read all of those things, including their privacy policy. I'm not saying there's one in mind, please don't worry.
This reminds me that it's probably 10 or 15 years ago, there was a gaming company who had terms and conditions use of the game as a video game. And like the very last line of it was something you relinquish your soul to the devil. And they just put it in there as kind of a joke, and nobody read it for years and years and was accepting. I just want to play the game. I accept. Nobody reads them because they're so long. So
There's a camera going up somewhere.
right, yeah. So CCPA definitely bringing it close to home, but there are at least 15 others that are bringing it close to home for us. They're all going to look something like this as well. So who does it apply to? So this is for some of the folks in this room. There's a moment here. It's not me yet, but this is an or. So it's if you have revenues in excess of 25 million, or if you buy, sell, or receive or share for commercial purposes personal information on more than 50,000 consumers. Or you derive 50% or more of your annual revenues from selling PII from personal information. So it's an or situation there. If you meet any of those criteria, keep your ears open. There's lots of stuff to learn here.
Do any of you knowingly sell PII?
You said knowingly.
Does anybody know what the definition of the word sell is? I'm serious. There's actually a lot of pontification about what sell means. So just something to think about.
So yeah, roughly the timeline, the data mapping and record keeping requirements have already started. That was January 1 of 2019. January 1 of 2020 it goes into effect, and enforcement begins in July.
Yeah, here it comes.
It's coming fast, coming fast. So there is a notice requirement. So you got to tell what the categories of personal information are that are being collected, the purpose for which the personal information is being used. This all sounds pretty familiar so far. Clear and conspicuous opportunity to opt out from the sale of his or her personal information, and designated methods for submitting privacy inquiries and requests, including at a minimum a toll-free number and a website address. So you have to make it an easy way for people to get at their information. Is that all news to everybody? A few people that are aware. Okay. There's a non-discrimination clause, and so this one, when I first learned about this one, this kind of threw me a bit. So you cannot deny goods or services to a particular consumer. You can't charge different prices or rates for goods or services, including through the use of discounts or other benefits or imposing penalties on someone. So we used to run a lot of campaigns that were price sensitivity campaigns, so discount sensitivity. So if I send you $5 off and you $10 off, which one wins more? And if $5 off wins, great, we're going with $5 off. But I got to run that test first. What's saying here is that that's no longer valid. You can't make a better deal for you than you. Yeah, that's sort of takes one of our weapons out of the arsenal there. So you can't provide a different level of quality of goods or services to the consumer if the consumer exercises their rights under this title. And suggesting that the consumer would receive a different price or rate for goods or services, or a different level of quality of goods or services. Lots of new things to consider. So there's an access requirements as well. So you have to deliver free of charge to the consumer categories of personal information collected about them, categories of sources from which the information is collected, the business or commercial purpose for which it was collected, the categories of third parties with whom it's being shared, and the specific pieces of personal information that are being collected. Is everybody prepared for that? Neil is. Once again, this is kind of a big deal, and I think most of us kind of hope that there's not a lot of these requests, but I know you've had some recent instances where it's happening.
One company I know has had over 1,000 in the month of January alone requests to go through this process, and there's all kinds of sticking points in there, but the mechanics of getting that information to them accurately has to be well thought out, well planned, well executed, well mapped, well vetted to make sure it's accurate, because what you don't want to come back and do is go, oh, that's not all the data we have, we found more. It's a bad day, right? But most people are in that situation because they think they know what they're looking for. And there's all kinds of rules and complexity to it. But to today's point, if you're not thinking about the principles here, at least now, it's going to come in a wave later.
So there's a deletion requirement as well, just like GDPR. So any business that receives a verifiable request from a consumer to delete the consumer's personal information must delete it. Once again, where is it, right? In my CRM, it's in my marketing automation platform, it's on Jane's desktop in an Excel file, it's in SharePoint, where is it? It's in our ERP, it's in our POS, it's everywhere. So this can get tricky.
How many people can define delete? There are 3 subcategories of delete in the CCPA manual. Oh, nobody? Come on. Late today, you drink a beer. I'm serious, but these words matter, because when he says delete, it can also be de-identify, anonymize. If it's an archive, you know, deal with, there's all kinds of things that your business has to understand, digest, and know the most commercially effective way to respond to the consumer request in its transparent fashion. It's a lot of fancy words.
So there's a restriction on the sale of the data. So if you've received a direction from consumer not to sell the data, you have to honor that as well. So if you are monetizing data that you capture in any way and someone has said stop it, you better be prepared to stop it. So some core rules.
All right, so all that stuff you just put out is big, bag, and scary. Everybody take a drink. Because it is. It's a fundamental difference in the way we operate in a commercial fashion in the domestic US. And I say those very qualifying words specifically. We've never had to go back and look at what we created. We just create it for value. We drive the business forward. We drive the business fast. We go as what we can. We get the data. We make forms. We put it in the database. We share it with everybody we have to because they need to know it. All that can still happen. It just has to happen with a little bit of thoughts. So imagine on the highways if we just took away all the traffic rules. Anybody can imagine what that would look like for a moment? That's right. I mean, some people just know the rules and disregard it, but the point is these rules and fundamental regulations are forcing business to establish digital transformation rules. How do you do it? It doesn't say stop. It didn't say anywhere up here, stop doing your business. It didn't say you're going to be out of business. It said, think about it from a consumer perspective of how to safely do your business going forward. So the core rules are transparency and consent. You better be absolute transparent when I give you my consent on what you're going to do. I am that consumer. I will watch that consent form, and I will watch to see what you do. I'm just difficult that way. I come in from a privacy psychosis perspective. You know, the government's watching me, it's bad enough, I don't need everybody else doing it. My family loves the value they get. They love targeted marketing. They love learning about new products that are tangential to what they know. They really get value from that. But you better be consistent. Governance, process the SARs. Anybody know what SAR is? Subject action request, DSARs, data subject action. When I come and say, I want you to do something, how are you going to do it? Make sure you understand how you do it thoroughly. My favorite one is data maps. Data maps is where I spend all of my time in life helping organizations understand where is it. Because, you know, oddly enough, we don't know the answer to that. Dave was talking about emails, spreadsheets, under the desk drawer, on tape drawer, under somewhere else, in a server in a country where it's not supposed to be. But you didn't know that because it's cloud, right? How do you know your cloud is not floating in the wrong jurisdiction? Things like that suddenly become relevant. You have to know, because if I ask you to delete it, you better know where everyone is to go get it. So it all works together. Privacy by design is a new concept in the core rules. In other words, take this information in, think about it as part of your business process, and make sure the process you're creating are aligned with it. The principles are not fundamentally rapidly changing. Yes, the details of mass tort and class actions and the right to establish privacy or harm and adequacy and all that stuff play. But if you follow your privacy by design principles, everything you do will be more resilient going forward. You won't have to be disruptive in your change later. Because I'm going to tell you right now, how many people have heard the word data lake? Data mart, data warehouse. Delete them all right now because they're wrong. Does that sound disruptive? Right, because it's full of information. As PII, I'm like, come and ask you to delete my information. You're going to have to go in there and delete it, which alters every record you've ever pulled out of it from back to now. So all of your analytics are wrong. All this other stuff is inaccurate because I'm pulling it out. But if I told you back then, if you just simply de-identify the PII so you don't have to when the request comes, your data is more resilient. Ladies and gentlemen, it's a simple privacy by design discussion. But if you don't have it, you'll pay the price for it later in retrofitting. So listen to the principles now. And my favorite one is managing third parties. I go to a lot of academic discussions with people, a lot of information security officers sit around. It's kind of a group therapy session, if you will, about how bad things are. But when we talk about the managing third parties, 2 of those people in the room lost my data personally. They're friends of mine. I'm like, how dare you? They said, well, I gave it to Bob and Bob lost it. It wasn't my fault. I'm like, I went to Bob. Bob goes, well, I'm new. I don't know what to do. But it's real because now your third parties have to behave as adequately as you do with the data you give them. But yet we're not adequately measuring their performance against that. Right? Standard threat landscape. I'm not going to go to the bank and rob the bank. I'm going to get the armored car, or the soft top car as we call it now, because they put the money in a convertible and drove it down the road. That's much easier to get to. Same principle here. You can lose it through those processes if you're not making sure it's adequately protected. And those are some core rules to consider. If you follow these rules, no matter what the regulations ebb and flow, these are fairly resilient for all. Oh, my favorite one is design a plan. How many people have a plan? Panic is not a plan, although it is the first step in the plan. Right? Get it out of your system, panic, freak out, go through the process. But then you have to go through your adequacy, your intentional use, your privacy notice, your contracts, and security programs. All these play well together with how this works. But look at how many verticals in the organizational area of responsibility you've just touched. If you're in the privacy space, you're literally doing drug deals with everybody in the company to get them to cooperate, because it takes everybody to do it. It's one of the first places that literally had to go across legal and business owners and security and convince them all that what this regulation says is legit and it has to be done. And then negotiate with them like it's a negotiation on how we're going to do it. But it takes all of that to make it work. And of course, then execute your plan. Once you have all those elements, once you have those core responsibilities, this is really fast, by the way. This is like a week-long course on how to do this in about 10 minutes, because you're drinking beer, we won't get your attention. But you do your external privacy policy, you establish your transparency, you tell consumers what you're doing. If you're doing nothing else today, make sure that is there. Because if I'm the Attorney General, which I'm not, you can all take a deep sigh of relief, I would weaponize that against you. In other words, you say you do it and you're not doing it. It's one of the worst penalties in the market out there. But if you simply say, I'm doing the best I can, and this is how I'm doing it, you say, well, it's not in line with the policy, but you're trying to keep working. You're fundamentally in line with the principle. I'm not a lawyer, that's not legal advice. I did not state a Holiday Inn Express. But listen to what I'm saying. Follow the principle. Personal data inventories. We talked about how to get an inventory, but in that inventory, how do you know what types of data you have? Is it classified? Do you know what PII is? Do you know how it's defined? Do you know how to make PII? Do you? You know what it is? That's personal information. But what is personal information? Okay, here's an example, and I'll use it. My name is Neil. Last name is Watkins, right? There's a lot of us. I get one of their email all the time. Trust me, I know how it works. But can you find me with that? Is that PII? Well, not really. You can't find me on the globe that way. But did you know if you put that with a zip code, you have an 86% accuracy rate of finding exactly who I am? But yet PII does not include the zip code. But now that I've combined them, I created PII. So there's the principle of creating it even for business purposes when you don't know you've done it because you've associated information that made it so. Wow, that's really academic, isn't it? But it is real. And people do it all the time and don't realize it. So you take disparate information. Now it's in subject. So your personal data inventory, inputs, processes, storing, outputs, what are you doing with it? Have you analyzed every part of its data lineage to make sure it is or is not? Because I promise you, somebody's putting it together somewhere. Data warehouse. Anybody talk to a database programmer? They love putting data together, right? It's their whole life. But review your notices, your consent language, and opt-out processes, and by all means, opt out. Don't be that company I had an email last week that didn't offer me out after I opted out. I may have courtesy copied the Department of, was it the Attorney General of California, even though I'm not a resident, going, hey, they're not letting me opt out. It probably went to the spam folder, but it was fine.
He's the guy. All right, this is what we have to worry about.
But if you take that mindset, the rest of the stuff becomes easier. Vendor considerations, we talked about sharing data. Dave talked about the least principle. Again, building your data warehouse. Do you need that data in there? If you don't put it in there. But back in the day, we said put it all in there because you never know if we're going to need it. It's a different way of thinking. Vendor considerations. I'm giving this vendor all kinds of really important information, but do they actually need it to fulfill the requirement I gave them? Ironically, we never thought about it. We said, hey, skip to them. Well, now that's going to be a problem because they can lose it. You get to go to court. They get to go to court. Everybody has a court date, and it's a really bad day. So think about how you do that. And of course, your incident response. This is my favorite one. If you have a loss of PII, who do you tell? And if the answer is every jurisdiction of every person in that database, you're correct.
Sounds easy.
My favorite one is I went to a client once, friend, in New Mexico, and they said, we don't have any notification laws. I'm like, do you have information of anybody else outside of New Mexico? Oh, yeah. We have people from all across the nation. He said, all those apply. And the look on their face was priceless. But that's what I'm talking about. Who do you tell? How do you tell? That's when the problem becomes if you don't pre-identify these things, right? So the incident response timing is the wrong time to figure out how to deal with this. It can just take some simple planning. Like I said, it's okay to say step one is panic because you're going to a little bit. As long as you gather some very distinctive steps after that, you will survive these kind of challenges. But execute the plan. So yeah, I said don't panic, even though I say you're going to. But the do's and don'ts, don't panic, don't ignore it. Oh, geez. I love people that ignore it. I'm not going to be too pointed, but I've heard all kinds of things like, well, that doesn't apply to us. I'm like, great. How did you come to that determination? blank stare. I'm like, that's a problem. You should have at least written down how you thought about that. But don't ignore it. Don't say my exemption or this is blanket. It helps me get through this process. Don't say I don't know if I have anybody in there, so I'm going to ignore it. Look at it, analyze it, and if it is an exception, write it down. On this day, we looked at the law. Everybody said it doesn't apply. These are the reasons why. Signed me. So when they do come knocking, you say, hey, we put some thought into it. It's called defensibility. Even though we may be wrong in our assumption at the end, we at least thought about it. If any lawyer was in the room, that's the difference between, negligence and gross negligence. That's a huge difference. So you want to be careful with that. Don't share a seller without consent. And again, make sure you understand what sell means. It is changing. It literally has changed twice since it released the guidance. But it's refining, so watch what that means, because one day it may suddenly mean it when they change it. Don't stare unnecessary and don't collect data for future use. In other words, don't just warehouse it because someday you may need it. It will become more of a liability. What do? You do partner with providers to address it. You do stuttering because I've been drinking. Do define the PII. I'm not kidding, I did not drink. Do get your data maps, do update your privacy policy, you guys have heard this already through my whole speech, do these good things. Because at least now you're preparing for it. I know everybody in this room is going, I don't really do this in my organization. Great, find the one that does, and partner with them to get it done. Because everybody has an element of their job that does impact this. Like I said, you have to partner with everybody to make this work. Right? We all don't row this boat the same. We're all just going to spin in a circle until it finally sinks. But these are the kind of things that are happening. And the last thing I want to talk about in this is when the privacy regulations came online, regulations come from laws. Laws establish rights. Rights establish civil liability. Anybody get that chain? In the past, when I came and said you did my privacy stuff wrong, federal judges, and I'm not a lawyer, would simply just say that you did not endure harm. You had to get a credit report, they gave it to you, you're inconvenienced, but you weren't harmed. Once they established the privacy rights, you violated my right, I can establish harm. Again, that's just a small layperson's term. But that fundamentally changes what can happen civil and criminal after an event. Whereas before, we get a little bit out of jail, now it's going to have some real teeth. It may have gums at first, but I promise those teeth are going to start coming out the longer this gets, right? So again, don't ignore it. That's the only message I would come out.
All right, so that takes us to questions. And there's a lot to absorb when you start thinking about this. And as Neil said, when you think about what is your particular role, whether you're an agency in the room or you're a marketer in the room, you care about this, and now you're thinking to yourself, well, what am I going to do about it? And a seat at the table is probably the biggest thing. You have to become aware of what's required, and you have to make sure that your voice is heard so that from a marketing perspective, we don't lose ground, but we shift where we are so that we can use data in the right way and make sure we're playing by the rules. And if we're doing all that stuff the right way, we're probably going to have better relationships with our customers anyway.
So a lot of the larger companies, they have, they're pretty understandable all the privacy policy on their sites. Is that what your company does?
Okay. We don't give legal advice. That's it once or twice. But we do understand how to interpret the regulations and the operational clauses. And when it comes to developing policy, we can definitely help you. And then we can help you operationalize that policy, including the technology, operational efforts, how you change your processes to make it.
So I mentioned earlier, when we were looking for someone to partner with us, we came across Neil and liked what they had to say, in particular because it's not about, oh my God, I have to do all these things immediately. It's about how can we make progress towards the end goal, and it's a moving target anyway. So it's kind of like your website; it's never really done, right? Well, complying with all the rules and regulations are never really going to get done. But can we show that we're making reasonable progress in a reasonable fashion? And again, for us, hit very close to home because we house a lot of data for folks, and we allow people to access that data. So it's a big deal for us, and that's why we needed someone to partner with for that.
Since nobody else has any questions, I'm going to talk to you. Go ahead.
Well, so you talked about a lot of different countries are kind of implementing these laws, like Japan and Hong Kong.
Yep.
Is the recommendation just to kind of try to hit the most specific, the most extensive kind of GDPR requirements, or like how are you supposed to adapt to all these hundreds of dozens of different privacy laws?
Take a
One sec. So for those online, so the question was about, with all the international laws that are coming into play, how do we determine which ones to address first?
All right. Well, the question is, do you take the most restrictive and apply that across your universal business? You can do that, and I'll meet you in the unemployment line later, because your business will grind to a halt, right? It's like with security, best security is to make sure nobody accesses the data. It doesn't work. So what you do is, I can get very specific, but to be generic, throw all of them at the wall, step back, defocus your eyes, take that center mass and apply that in a risk-tolerant way, right? The adequacy is according to what you believe the value is and your ability to meet it, as long as you have a continuous improvement plan to make sure you work on any gaps you have. For example, make sure that you have the right contracts in place, that you meet the right requirements, all the way down to privacy. I mean, there's all kinds of complexity in it, but do those things if you're an international business. If you're not, watch the principles that are coming out of the GDPR primarily. I say the principles. What are they after? Transparency? Well, I can do that. Consent? These are the principles. And if you have those principles kind of embedded in your practice, the specifics you can survive later without a significant disruption. And that's probably the best way to answer it, is look at that center mass, philosophically adapt to the things that they're talking about, and you'll survive the changes. With, yeah, you'll have some ripples, but it won't be absolutely disruptive. All right, on that note, when you're talking about marketing, here's the things I've learned in marketing. One, it's evil. I've now come to know a company called LiveRamp. I don't know who they are, but I now know what they do. And Google Analytics is one of my favorite ones because it seems to be well used. So if somebody comes in and says, forget me from your marketing platforms and use Google Analytics, does everybody here know what to do? Yeah, you want to talk about some complexity, right? Everybody's like, well, I just take a unique identifier and it doesn't really know who they are, and I have to marry those two things up to know that it's actually you. And there's this long oration that has to happen. But what I found is that nobody really understood that. So I'm like, okay, well, wait a minute. If you delete my identifier in your database, can you ever associate that record with me again? Well, no, because I wouldn't know who you are. Well, no. So you de-identified my record. Now, maybe you don't have to delete it out of Google Analytics, but they are your partner. So you provide that information to the consumer to say, we partner with Google Analytics, tell them where to go delete, because they have a really nice delete page. By the way, Google is phenomenal now on how to respond to privacy requests. Imagine that, right? LiveRamp, same way. I went in to delete all my LiveRamp identifiers. Somebody's database just went nuts because I suddenly disappeared off the marketing platform because they tie that to my third and first party cookies. Cookies are another one. Most people don't even understand what they are. Dave taught me about a thing called Pixel. You would think after all my years I knew what that was. I was shocked that I had never heard of that. I'm like, this little evil thing does that to me? And it's really helpful, right? It is meant to be helpful. Watch what you're doing, give you relevant things, do all these wonderful things. But I'm like, okay, well, it's also talking about what you're doing. Making sure those things expire, right? So how are you going to get it off my browser if I say, forget me? And you're going to be puristic in your approach. Well, simply put an expiration date on your cookies and one day they'll fall off. Okay, that's the best you can do. But those are the kind of conversations you get when you get these very specific things of how it affects marketing at a very technical level. Because again, we all do great jobs, we all make good campaigns, we all make relevant information relevant to people, and we do really appreciate that. But when it comes to unwinding that, we've never really thought through all of its complexity. Who we're sharing, how we're intertwining, whose SaaS platform we're using, what they have to do to help. And by the way, the Influence SaaS platform is wonderfully well prepared to help you do that. But everybody else is too. You just have to know to go ask, right? And that's where it starts. So all the complexity starts with, hey, let me just look at basic principles and see if I can apply them. So if you came up and said, hey, Bob or Sally, how would you delete me out of the database? And if they turn white, you might want to focus a little bit on that for a while. What?
How do you square opt out with the like?
How do you square it?
Huh?
Well, once I say, this is a funny one, because I opted out, now I'm in your database and active don't mail, right? And I say, forget me, you delete that record? Huh? Yeah, that's on me. You also have canned spam issues you got to watch too, but that's a whole other story. Now, this is where it gets really esoteric, and I'm not going to go into too much detail, but you can make a business exemption case and say, I have to do that to honor the other. You engage me in a contract and say, don't send me an email. I'm going to keep that record and make sure I don't send you that email. But you only save that email. You don't save all the other information with it. For example, as a dead record. That's one way to approach it. But again, listen to all the complexity of that simple question. Right? You can simply say delete it. You're on your own. There's no definitive regulation answer that will tell you what to do. If you listen to the principle, well, I need to know you've asked me to never email you, and if you delete it, you're going to get an email from me again one day if you reassociate yourself. You can simply say that in your delete statement saying, if I do this, this is going to happen. Or not. Please, if you respond to consumers, which is required by the law, make it very simple. Consumers are way off the charts on what they expect from this. So the simpler you get, the very direct you get, the better you will be and the better they will be.
So third party, right? It's all really nice to get a big middle of trying to do it. So I got to get that done. Is there any kind of certification out there or something? I guess David for confidence in something digital, like, but how do you, as a hunter, determine if that third party actually knows what they're doing? Obviously, I realize I will probably be mentioned to me, but if I do I do some sort of something with that data, if your customer's product data, how do you verify it?
It's a really complicated question, but the first question is to ask.
Sure.
Ask some guiding questions, at least come with a set of questions that are important. You say, how are you achieving these things? There's a whole discipline out there called third-party vendor risk management, or TPRM, or whatever you want to call it, that establishes guidelines that you can say, hey, partner, I do these 10 things. Show me how you do these 10 things that are important as well. And they can come back and say, this is how I do these 10 things, and you just inspect it for change every so often. Contractual is another one, contractual risk transfer, and saying, when I sign up with somebody, I want you to do these 10 things. I put it in my contract, and I expect you to operate. There's all kinds of different ways to do that.
So, yeah, it's all scary stuff. So for us, what this has meant over the years is that, I don't know, it was probably 10 years ago, we got our first security questionnaire from a prospect saying, do you meet these requirements? And we're like, oh, dang, we gotta get our game up leveled here. And so we up leveled our game so that we could say yes to the things we needed to say yes to. That was a 10 question questionnaire. And the most recent one I did was over 150 questions. So just to be qualified to submit the RFP, you have to go through the security questionnaire. So we see more and more of that. And so that's another reason why we need someone like Neil on our team to say, hey, help us interpret some of these questions. And in a lot of cases, they're asking just a whole bunch, and a lot of them don't really matter, or they don't really care about them. They just found a list somewhere, and they're like, use this list. If they can say yes to all this, we're in good shape. And so Neil helps us understand which ones are really, really meaningful, really impactful, which things can be managed through contracts instead. So we absolutely have clauses in our agreements that say, hey, look, we're being careful with your data. Your data is your data. We are not selling your data. We have to play by a whole set of rules that are all totally things we would have done anyway, but it's now contractual.
So how do you define who can actually request opting out of deletion? So, I mean, at first it's easy.
Did you tell him he could ask questions?
I did not tell him he could ask questions.
How do you define who can? There's a lot of ways to do that, but entities are not consumers. Consumers are consumers, and they're well defined within the regulation. They have the right to ask. And the California law says a resident. Well, there's 26 tests you can go through to determine if they're a resident. 26, yes, I worked through all of them. And it is a painful exercise. So companies finally said, if a consumer of any kind, we don't care, just makes a request, we'll honor it because we see that they're coming in every state law anyway, we might as well get ready. I've seen some bite that bullet on. But entities don't. B2B is exempt today, for now. Again, what does B2B mean, right? Ironically, in the GDPR, a really weird way to look at it is if my first name dot last name at my business, I can consider that PI under that. But if it's just something else at my company, I can't. So it's all those gray areas are still being evolved, but think about the principles again. It has to be a consumer. They have to be a verified person. In other words, if they're going to ask for data, you have to know who they are with absolute out of doubt. Otherwise, you just kind of made your own breach of things. And you have to come back and verify them, and you have to send them and be honoring that request. So consumer is what I would tell you is what you're looking for, not entities. Does that answer your question?
It's a quick follow-up though. If, I mean, this is an opinion item, but if entities come, is there a burden on the company that way? So
companies don't have rights in the established regulations today.
But if you're playing what if, and if they did, I would assume that would come with it. Is that if companies were able to do that as a whole, say stop, lose all your information about us, then I would think we would have to comply with that at a corporate level too.
yeah, that like whatever. Going by the wayside.
Yeah, the Attorney General and the regulators in California backed off of that because they understood the commercial impact would be significant. They were really after protecting the consumer in the wake of the analytical scandal and trying to get out the GDPR version of it as fast as they could to make a representative sample. But again, business to business is still exempt. In fact, for all those who did the great heroic effort of getting CCPA ready, the next wave is now with your own HR records. That was at least exempted for a year, but it's still coming at this year. So now we have to go deal with that. So to your point, and to answer your question, it is about consumers in the domestic US.
So we'll probably learn a ton as soon as actions take place, and those actions will probably be what happens with the rest of the world is they'll go after the biggest companies first. So California will take action against Google for something, or Facebook or somebody like that, and we're all going to sit back and watch, or they're going to go after somebody who's just absolutely egregiously offensive, completely not following the rules, and make an example out of them so that the rest of the world kind of wakes up even more.
So here's a question for the room. It's my favorite one. If I'm a California consumer, can I go to the credit bureaus and be forgotten? Equifax is a private company, publicly traded, right? Does it qualify? These are things you just think about as a consumer now. No, they lose it in regularity. It's okay. But no, these are the questions that are going to start evolving and hitting these regulatory topics. So where is that right valid? And they can say it's a business exemption because that's our business, that's our contract with you. I'm like, well, wait a minute, you don't have a contract with me. Utilities that are now doing smart meters are collecting massive amounts of information that can be assembled to BPI, but they own that data, you don't. What are you going to do with that in the next couple of years as these evolves? But if you listen to what's happening, the arguments are being made, definitions are getting redefined, but the principles are the same. Transparency, do you have it? What are you doing with it? I at least need to know that. I have a right to know what you know about me and what you're doing. And if you can establish that back to them, again, fundamentally, the details will matter, but you at least have a philosophy with the organization how to address it. And as consumers, I mean, there's that other part of me that puts that hat on and says, everybody here should be equally curious as to how this works. Because once you dig into this, it is amazing what's out there about you that you didn't know. I mean, some of these things, the information marketers have are predictive about what I'm going to do next. I just really wish Amazon would know I already bought the blender. Stop telling me about it. There's a trigger I would like to value. Like, hey, I bought the blender you've advertised to me. Would you at least record that and stop sending me more? But all that aside, they're predicting, okay, well, you bought a blender, you're going to want something else now. I really like that because I didn't know I needed that. But now I'm like, well, of course that makes sense, right? But they know my behaviors. So as a consumer, I'm like, well, wait a minute. I'm not sure I'm comfortable with them knowing me better than my family does, right? So those are the kind of things, where do those lines draw? At today's point in the marketing, how do you make sure you're effective? Because the more effective you are at that consumer request, the more prolific your business will be, because that's becoming the next wave of marketers that understand this and employ it ethically and regulatory correct and effectively. Those are going to be the margin. And the next generation of life, that's where it's coming.
So the New York Times published an article, gentleman talked about Facebook, and 3 or 4 or 5 months later, he talked about his experience having talked about. It was a difficult process for him, and maybe some of you guys have read the article. But what he found was that it's money. They don't release male or female online now. And if he doesn't get direct, it's not like the advertising directly on it. And so I think it's very interesting to think about what Facebook shares out there. And they will get hit with one of these.
They will.
Certainly will.
Facebook was the target.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Because again, and I told my kids this when they were kind of asking me questions. First of all, trying to explain what you do for a living to your children. It's an absolute disaster. But they were like, well, what are you doing? I said, well, and it was funny. They were talking about Android phone and Apple phone. And I'm not a proponent of either one. But they said, well, Dad, the phone from Apple costs $1,000 and the Android phone costs $250. I said, yep. Where do you think the other $750 is coming from the other phone? I said, what do you mean? I said, they will monetize your information. That's where Google makes its money. Have you ever really bought anything from Google? They're like, well, no. I'm like, but yet we're one of the biggest companies in the world. How did that come and get that critical thinking going? To your point, whether you're in or out, right? It's funny how that precipitates. I get generic now because I opt out of everything I can touch. And it's been a couple of years now, and it's starting to get really weird. I mean, yeah, I got an AARP ad the other day. I am not of eligibility for that. But they took a random guess, right? But it is interesting, you said that there are now other side effects too. And that story, when people completely try to go off of that, it gets really interesting because you can't use maps. You can't use the stuff that we've become accustomed to because it can't recognize you.
Well, my bank says, you know where you are, you can help them identify it, and you have credit charges on your card.
Yep.
Somebody's in Mexico, your card, so make sure you know what you're all buying.
Oh, yeah, and more importantly, I don't mind it so much. It's just, okay, do I feel you're going to keep it safe? Well, again, that's a whole other world of who's collecting and how safe can they keep it. But again, we haven't thought that through as consumers yet in our lifetime. I mean, I'm of a certain age. It's new to me still, and I grew up with all of this stuff. I watched it happen. The ones that came up with it turned on already are even less connected to all of these things because they just have known that's the way it is. So it'll be interesting to see how these trends continue. But if you listen to them and you understand their effect on your business proactively, you can manage that outcome. You can excel as a result of it, but you definitely shouldn't get that massive setback of, oh, we have to redo our whole business model. Because when GDPR came online, I literally had people going, so wait a minute, I have to delete my entire database? Did you consent it? No. Yes, you do. Now listen to that for a minute. That's years of information that's valuable to marketing and growing your business. Gone. Now, that wasn't the final outcome on all of it, but listen to the impact it could have if you're not thinking. And it's small, but it turns out to be a really big deal. Everybody here all excited about it? Going to wear a privacy champion when they run out of here? And again, as we said, this is the CCPA. California, one of the largest economies in the world, if it was a standalone sliver of things, is contemplating the EU has, and all the other jurisdictions are coming with. So it's real, it's tangible, it's evolving. Please watch that event horizon as you continue to drive your businesses forward. Because if you see it coming, like that train you talked about, those trains move pretty slow if you just sidestep it. But if you're just sitting here looking not at that train, it will run you over. So that's a good metaphor for that. Any other questions? Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you, everybody. Thank you, everybody online as well. Thank you.
And just full disclosure, my marketing comes